So before we get started, I'm going to go through a couple of logistics and we'll go around and do quick introductions. I think we'll do an icebreaker at the lunch just to keep us on time track because I tend to get kind of, lengthy in my icebreakers. Queen of icebreakers, full disclosure. So everybody have a parking pass displayed on their dash, printed in color. Okay, great. There are agendas and handouts in the back. If you didn't grab them, take an opportunity now to grab one. And then we will be having a networking lunch at 12:15. $20. We can invoice you. And if you want to pay cash, you can do that today too. But Brad's all poised to invoice.
Yeah, as you say, essentially, if I don't have cash come from me, I'm just gonna so you want to pay cash.
Yeah, and the fee for attending online is $0. Sorry, put that in there. And yeah, so then we can go around and do introductions. Just please share your name, title, who you work for, and that's it. So I'm gonna start with you, Crystal.
Crystal Johnson, City Manager, City of Granite Falls.
John Durbeck, DePaul County Parks and Recreation Manager. Joe Tart, Chicago County Parks Director.
Jeff, please, park planner, City of Rochester.
Renee.
Good morning, Renee Mattson, Greater Minnesota Regional Parks and Trails Commission. And if you don't have one of our 2024 policy and planning reports, there's some here, so grab them.
Brad Harrington, Brad County Parks and Rec.
Jessica Peterson, Parks and Rec Manager, City of
Ross Demand, Parks and Recreation Director, Rick County.
Carolyn Ziegler, Olmsted County.
Trevor Pompea, Executive Director, County North Region. Josh Doss, Park Planner, City of Oak. Jay Lotthamer, IXG.
Ben Anderson, Six County Parks Director.
Sorry,
Sarah Reed, Stark County Parks and Operations Coordinator. And we have, is Jen here?
Jen had to go to an appointment.
Oh, okay. Great. All right. Awesome. So thanks again for joining us. And we're going to go to the folks online to do introductions. Can I start with Sarah Chiquetto? Or not. Can the folks online hear us?
Yes.
Okay. How about we
Good.
start with Sarah Thompson?
Hi, Sarah Thompson, Itasca County Land Department in Grand Rapids.
Sarah's also on the board for Greater
Oh,
Minnesota.
yes, District 2. Sorry.
And Sarah Chiquetto?
Hi, this is Sarah Chiquetto. I am District 1 on the board. I'm with the St. Louis and Lake Counties Regional Railroad Authority and the Sabi Trail.
So thanks, Sarah. Anyone else online? Okay, great.
Yeah, we had about 6 or so other people, so they might be joining in.
Okay. Sounds good. So we're gonna get moving right into the agenda. We're gonna start with the legislative action and how we're moving Greater Minnesota Parks and Trails goals forward. So I'm gonna introduce Elizabeth Wefel. She's with Clarity and Hood, and she is the lobbyist for Greater Minnesota Parks and Trails. She's going to be going over the legislative session so far and how Clarity and Hood is really focusing on goals and objectives for GMPT right now and then for the rest of the session. So I'll turn it over to Elizabeth.
Great, thank you. And it's great to see you all here. It's kind of fun. This is the first year we've added this space for those of you who've been coming to our legislative action days for a couple of years. We've moved over to the Capitol, but because of construction, it's really difficult to get rooms over there. So we moved it back here, but we have this new space. I will say, I think the coffee is finally brewed. So if you need coffee, feel free to duck out there and get it. And we'll just kind of start from here. This is, I guess they can see me online too. The owl is here. I kind of feel like Steve Jobs or Tim Cook with a disembodied version of myself up there. But okay, here we go. Receivers here, so just point that there. Yeah. Okay. Sure.
Is it on?
It's on. It's blinking orange.
Oh, okay, well, then I'm going to record it.
Okay. Here, sorry for the brief technical difficulty. Legislative advocacy and strategy. So as Gina said, I'm gonna go over kind of what we're aiming for at the legislature. I want to talk about what's going on, talk about where we are at in session, because it has been, as you may know, a really bizarre session, you know, and then what we need you to do now, and more importantly, what I'm probably going to need you to do later in this session. So, next slide. Session dynamics. Now, unless you've been hiding under a rock, which is possible, you do hang out in parks, so maybe you've been hibernating for this winter, but in case you haven't been, things have been different this year. I say we got a late start. Technically, the legislative session began on January 14th, but as you probably know by now, due to a dispute, I'm not going to say who was right or wrong, the legislative session started January 14th, but the Democrats did not show up until a couple weeks later. And because of that, it really has been a very different feel at the Capitol. And when I said that I'm going to need you to do stuff now and do stuff later, it's partly because of that late start. One of the interesting things that happened was, again, without rehashing the disputes, you know, basically a Supreme Court decision, you know, the DFL didn't show up, GOP introduced bills, had them heard. The Supreme Court said that all of the bills that were initially heard or introduced were gone, like they never happened, so they had to be reintroduced. And so all of a sudden, since the Democrats came back in over the last, 2 weeks, everything has been redone. They've had to reintroduce all their bills. And so we are behind where we would typically be in the legislative session. This is the budget year. And so normally by now, the first week or two of January, they would have gotten through all of their initial meetings where they, introduced agencies and stuff like that. But the governor had told his agencies until the Democrats and Republicans resolved their dispute, agencies weren't supposed to be showing up. And now obviously that's all over, they can show up, but it means we're behind. So normally, honestly, this is about the same time we hold our legislative action day every year. And at this time, I'd be like, here's all the bills, here's what's going on, here's the things you need to worry about. Challenge we're running into right now is that it's really slow. And as we get into more of the issues, you'll see normally, I don't have quite the panic I would normally have at this time of year about some things. It's because they're not that far ahead. So I need you to listen to me now, but it's going to be really important. I'm going to emphasize this throughout, that we continue to stay in tune, because there are bills. There's things we want. There's two things we do at the legislature. We try to advocate for the things we want and then protect against the things we don't want. Right now, there's not a lot out there that worries me, but I'm still a little bit nervous that it could come. It's just, again, because of this delay, everything's going to get squished up. It might not, but we always have to stay on alert. I would say my job tends to be about 25% offense and 75% defense on a lot of things. With Parks and Trails, it's probably closer to 60% offense and 40% defense, unlike my other clients. But we do need to keep watching throughout the year. Okay, budget year. Every 2 years, under the Minnesota Constitution, they have to pass their budget bills. If they don't, we go into a government shutdown. We have not had a government shutdown since, I think, 2011, back in the Dayton years. I'm really hoping we don't have that now, because it's painful. That's when it starts impacting parks, things like that. And they've changed the law, so it's not as bad, but it's something they still need to get done. One of the challenges with getting the budget done this year is that this year we're not facing a budget deficit that we know of yet. They are anticipating a budget deficit in the out years. And so what that means for us and for everyone else is that spending requests are going to be viewed with skepticism. They are not going to be putting a lot of new money towards anything. In fact, they may be cutting funds. I don't think there's any funds that Greater Minnesota gets, quite frankly, because we don't get a ton, will be cut, but it makes it much harder to ask for new funds. I do think we will be seeing in a number of budget areas some cuts. It's possible we could see tax increases. I think that given the political climate, that may or may not happen. The other big question is, can we get a bonding bill done? Now, This year, I mean, we are supportive of doing a bonding bill, but we are only introducing 2 bills. So this year, we are not introducing a bonding bill because that would just be, you know, and I have found with legislation, we need to focus on a couple things, and we'll focus on the bonding bill for next year, but we are supportive of the governor's recommendation to put money into parks and trails for bonding. So number of interesting dynamics. Next slide. Is it working? Oh, look at that. Again, like I said, everything is, it's very funny. I'll be honest, I do use, like, I take last year's slideshow and do it. And I think the session dynamics, I found an old slideshow where it just said everything is hard. I would just say this year, everything is a bit off. You know, in addition to things moving slow, there's a weird vibe. The Senate had started off as shared power. So when they began the first couple of weeks, because of the unfortunate death of Kerry Gibson, you know, they were sharing power, but now the DFL controls everything. The House, again, took a while to start, but now the GOP is in control over there, but that's likely to shift after the March 11th special election. And it is very interesting. I would say, at least in the committees we care about, they are acting slightly less partisan because they know that they're not going to be able to cram a lot of stuff through. I would say that I'm seeing in some other committees that I work with and that my colleagues work with, there is a race to try and get bills to the House floor before the special election happens on March 11th, because they just, if nothing else, want to force folks to take a bad vote. That'll shift again after the March 11th special election. That will decide the Roseville seat. That was the controversial one where, unfortunately, my college classmate, of all things, actually claimed to have lived in Roseville, didn't, got booted out. That seat will be replaced. In all likelihood, it will be a Democrat. That is a very Democratic area. One thing I will say is that things will change if the Republicans win there, and never count out anything. I don't think that'll happen, but you never know. The other really odd thing, so one of the things we are constantly paying attention to as lobbyists is committee deadlines. The legislature runs on deadlines, which means, you know, you have to introduce your bills and get them heard in one body by X date, the next body by that date, and then through everything, all the finance committees by the 3rd date. Normally those are established by now. They haven't been. Quite frankly, I don't know when they're going to establish those, hopefully soon. But again, timing is off. It's just a weird year. And again, I've covered some of this, but what does it mean? I think budget discussions are going to be a lot more contentious. There's going to be less money for financial requests. And we already know that if they get a bonding bill done, which they really need to do, it's going to be smaller. Basically, what happened was, you know, last year is when they were supposed to be doing the bonding bill, and they had projected that they could do a larger one. Well, then they didn't get the bonding bill done. They spent money, which affects basically the state's debt ratio. Again, very boring stuff, but it impacts how much money they can take out for bonding. So seeing a smaller bonding bill, but for us, I think the biggest things, honestly, for us are to make sure that the legacy and the LCCMR bills get across the finish line. Right now, I have not heard of anyone messing with like what we're supposed to be getting in the legacy bills. I'm hoping that will stay that way. I think it will. I think especially with the way the power is balanced. The LCCMR bill, which I'll talk more about why we care about that. Right now, it appears to be fairly non-controversial. For those of you who've been around for a while, you may remember, particularly during COVID, there were several years when they did not get the LCCMR bill done. It's extremely important to get that done. I know Carlin has some money in there. I know our friends up in Ottertail County, that's there. Sarah Cachetta has money and extensions in there. And then there's money for the overall grant pools. It's important that it gets done, but I am very worried that it gets lost in the shuffle. So that's something we will be paying close attention to. The thing is with the bonding, with the budget year, they have to pass the environment budget. They have to pass the budget for the agencies. Technically, you don't have to pass a legacy bill or an LCCMR bill. You don't have to pass a bonding bill or a tax bill. No one shuts down if any of those 4 bills don't pass. These two, it's really important that it gets done. I would say the other outside of the strange dynamic, bad policy ideas are less likely to move forward. When we have a compressed time when they're trying to get the budget done, legislators are going to be a little less willing to be pushing forward on crazy ideas, also because of the power sharing agreement. Not saying it's gonna happen, especially if there's a bad idea with bipartisan support. But I'm not as worried about them this year, but I will be constantly watching. So what are our goals? Legacy funds, funding for the commission, more money for local parks and trails, and LCCMR, which includes LCCMR and bonding. Slow start has delayed the introduction of bad bills, so I want you to continue to watch throughout this session for legislative alerts and updates. Our legacy request. Now, all of you, and I'm gonna actually just grab one of these handouts there. I'm walking out of scope of the Zoom call. But if you did not, I want you to make sure you pick up one of these before you leave, and pick up extra. Do not worry about us running out. We have printers, we can print more. This is what one of the two things you're going to leave with your legislators, but it walks through what we're asking for, and it includes the bill numbers on the back. The front side is a little bit, you might recognize this because it's the same as it was, and very similar, I should say, not exactly the same as it was before, but so your legislators know who we are. The back talks about the priorities. The top two are the bills we're introducing, and then the bottom two are the ones we support. So let the legacy request. Now we're asking 20% of parks and trails for Greater Minnesota. Hopefully that will not be controversial. You know, that has been pretty settled over the last couple of years. We have run into occasionally with one particular lobbyist whose name we won't mention has tried to mess around with that formula at times. I don't think that's going to happen, especially since we have, you know, at least in the House right now, the Legacy Committee is controlled by somebody who actually represents Wright County. He's a Greater Minnesota legislator. I don't think they're going to mess with that formula. But again, we always need to make sure that that is in place. You know, honestly, it would be really great if they could just put that in statute so we wouldn't need to be talking about it every 2 years. But our attempts, and Renee and I have worked on this for a number of years, and some of you as well. We've tried to like sort of codify that. You know, in fact, there was a recommendation from a group to do that a couple of years ago, and then it got blown up by someone. So, but we still have to make sure that happens. There's a number of projects. In fact, I won't mention whose, but a number of your projects that have to have the funding extended. You know, it's been challenging over the last couple of years. You know, the supply chain, labor costs, other issues, weather means not everything gets done on time. So we need to extend the funding. And then the final piece is setting the DNR compensation at a flat rate for grant-related services. In the past, it has been sort of a number that says up to 2.5%. The challenge with that is it varies basically according to how much money you receive rather than sort of what is available. So looking at how other similarly situated groups are compensated, we came up with a number of $140,000 per year to represent the work that the DNR does. We value very much the DNR's work, but at the same time, we only get 20% of the legacy funding. And that's something I really try to remind, you know, legislators is that we don't receive a ton of money. So this bill is authored by Senator Houschild and Representative Strommen. So if you see either of them, I would ask you to thank them. I was very happy to see it was heard last week in the Senate. I guess technically there was 2 weeks. Everything runs together for me during the legislative session. I thought the hearing went very well. Renee testified, Gina Hugo testified in favor of our bill. With legislation like that, they don't pass it out immediately from committee. They lay it over and then they push them all together into one big bill, but it was very well received. I think it will go well. We're waiting for the House hearing. I have been reassured by the committee administrator, who I've known for years, that they will be hearing the bill in the House. So hopefully that will move forward and we can make, you know, achieve some of this. But again, this is really important. The bigger thing, honestly, we want to get what we're asking for. We also want to make sure they get the bill done. The second bill we have is, we've introduced this in past years, is that, again, we very much value the work that the Greater Minnesota Regional Parks and Trails Commission does, but you know, they can't do it for free. They need to pay the cost of the staff. They need to, you know, pay for the cost of meetings, the very nice reports the legislature demands. That has to be, you know, paid for. The challenge is that right now our only funding source for that is the legacy. And so we have been urging the legislatures to move that to a different funding source and pay for that out of the general fund. The idea is very well received, but like I said, the biggest challenge we are running into right now is that the state is looking at potential deficits in the out years. And so we're worried about, whether or not we'll be able to move that forward because of that. Those are the bill numbers and the same health authors. And again, this is all on this piece of paper. I will say that if you did print these off, by the way, from the email I sent yesterday, we made one slight change. So if you're going to meet with your legislators, pick up the new ones. Do not worry about us running out. We've got printers, we can make more. This is a very long-term important goal for us because the commission is never going to be quite at the same level as, say, the DNR or the Met Council. But at the same time, we think it's really important that Greater Minnesota sort of maintains this concept of we have a system of regional parks and trails. And that's why we want to continue to push to have it established so that it just doesn't exist in legacy. We took, as you may remember, in 2023, our first step towards that. We, for the first time in 2023, were able to secure funding outside of legacy. It was small, but we have now received a portion of the lottery in lieu. The second important step in establishing the commission and the system of parks and trails in Greater Minnesota as a separate entity is to start getting other funding sources for the commission. And so extremely long-term important goal. Unfortunately, I wish we could have gotten it done in 2023. The politics were there in the Senate. They were not there in the House. The person who would refuse to hear our bill is no longer in charge of the House Environment Committee, thankfully. But I wish we could have gotten it done then. Battling for that money from the lottery in lieu was hard enough. But we didn't have to have a hearing on it, so we were able to get that through. It was a little bit more challenging. But that person, in the House, you can only serve as chair of a committee for 3 years. That person is no longer in charge of the House committee. So still on the Environment Committee, but we have to worry about it less. Other bills we support. Again, you keep hearing me talk about the LCCMR. Now, I think most of you, honestly, I'll be honest, a lot of our very most active participants have designated parks and trails. But we are an organization of more than 130 cities. And, we also recognize not everyone can have a regionally designated park and trail. And that's why we've made funding for local parks and trails a very high priority for our organization. And so the LCCMR bill does include, I think it's $4.79 million for the DNR Parks and Trails grants. And I know, quite frankly, even those of you with designated parks, you have gotten grants for other facilities that aren't designated. Extremely important. I also know that a number of you have, I know Carlin does, like I said, Sarah does. He's not here today, but Kevin from Otter Tail has got funding in there. I looked at it and I think there was at least 6 or 7 members of ours who will receive funding in the LCCMR and or have extensions in there. So extremely important to get that done. And particularly on the extensions, again, you all experience this. You run into higher costs. You can't get something you need. New projects can't always get done on time. So those extensions are extremely important. That's why we need to get this bill done this year. There was a Senate hearing on this bill 2 weeks ago. It was fairly non-controversial. I always do get nervous when these are up for hearing because sometimes you get legislators who are like, LCCMR did a great job recommending, so I'm going to throw my own projects in there. Didn't happen. It was fairly quiet. There is actually, for those of you who are interested and like to watch House hearings, there is a House hearing on it today at 1 o'clock. We can also put it on the screen for those of you who are still around here. If you want to see it, it's in G3. We submitted a letter of support from Gina and Joe, written testimony. A lot of times they actually ask you to submit written testimony instead of verbal unless you're the bill sponsor. So we did that. We supported it. We will continue to watch. Cross your fingers. Hopefully things will continue to sail smooth on that. The final thing I'll mention too as well, we sometimes introduce our own bill on it this year. We did not this year. We will next year. The governor's recommendations for the bonding bill came out, and he did recommend slightly under $2 million for the local parks and trails grants programs. We are extremely supportive of that. It's going to be a tough year. The bonding bill is going to be smaller, a lot of competition. We are going to continue to support it. We will push the bonding chairs on that. But my hopes are better for next year because of the challenges we're running into. So I am gonna pause for a second and let Parker introduce himself since he's walking in the,
All right, like,
no worries.
Parker Scopehammer, City, Mankato.
Thank you, Parker. Sorry, I'm gonna pick on you. Okay, so messages for your legislators. You know, if you've sat through my lobbying presentations before, you know that the most important thing is getting to know your legislators, because you're always better off asking your legislator for something when it's not the first time you're meeting it. Right before we started, Brad Harrington and I were having a conversation, and he mentions he happens to run into one of his legislators every other week at a swimming meet. Honestly, that kind of thing, getting to know them in their community so you know who they are is the best way to do it. Now, I know if you are in greater Minnesota, our legislators, I'm thinking about like our friend up in Brainerd, his legislator, I can't even think where well, I guess Josh lives in your area, but you've got these really big districts. You may not know them as well. So this might be your first time meeting them, might be your second time meeting them, but it's really important. If nothing else, if you accomplish nothing else when you talk to them today, make sure they know who you are and who your organization is. Then second thing, once they know who you are, again, back of the sheet, tell them what Greater Minnesota Parks and Trails is. I go and meet with a lot of legislators. They get to know us that way, but they're going to listen. They see a lot of lobbyists. They see a lot of organizations. They're going to listen more when they're talking to someone from their district. Then I want you to talk about recent projects and how they benefit your communities. Now, there are some legislators who really get, I think I'm looking at Jessica here, like our Duluth legislators tend to get the value of parks and trails. It's not a question when you go talk to them. Not all legislators are like that, and so it's really important when you're talking to them that they understand the value of how this funding helps you get it done, how you leverage local support that you receive. There is none of our programs, you have to have some kind of a match that you put in generally. And and it's not just, financial support your community gives, but it's all the things you do. They need to understand how the community will benefit. If you are doing projects, I like to think of the joint project that Gina, Brad, is it Stearns County they have a joint project where they received money from the commission to have a rental fleet of sports equipment in the winter. Can you imagine how many kids and adults now know how to snowshoe or ski because of that? Jessica has a mobile mountain bike group. If you actually came to our summer meeting, you actually got to see it. Talking about how that engages the community and what it does, it will also help. It'll help your legislator get to know you. It will help them understand the value of the bill. But if they are supporters, it helps give them something to talk about, when they're talking in caucus about, do we give money for this program or that program? So it's really helpful for them to understand it. We then getting into the specifics again, if you forget, we've got all the stuff on the back here. Ask for support on legacy. We want to make sure we keep Greater Minnesota share, 20%, and move to a flat fee on the administrative fees. Also equally important, they've got to get the bill done. And I am not pulling the trigger yet. I'm not saying I'm worried it's not going to get done. I'll be honest, I've been doing this for 15 years. This is my 16th year. It never fails to astonish me some of the things that legislators fail to do. So it's always important to remind them, you have got to get this done. And if you have a project that's recommended for next year, absolutely reinforce that. The second bill, again, the funding for the commission. We know times are tight, but if we can get general funding for the commission, I already explained to you, it helps us in sort of establishing that long-term goal of making people recognize Greater Minnesota and the regional system is sort of a separate entity. But also, can you imagine if we have an extra $1 million every 2 years? What can we do with that money, Renee? Fund 3 to 4 more projects every year. I mean, can you imagine, John, if you got an extra $500,000, what would you do with that?
I don't know, a lot.
A lot. There's just a lot that we can do on that. So, and then remind them, again, the reason I put the bill numbers on there, so it's different in the Senate and the House. They're very different bodies. The Senate's the more august body. They only allow 5 legislators on each bill. I think we filled our bill in both bodies. So no one can add on to that. In the House, we can add 35 legislators. We're not there. So if your legislators want to sign on to that, please ask them to do so. The more bills, I think right now in the House, Representative Strommen is on there, Representative Kozlowski, I believe Representative Lily, and so forth. Because of the whole shenanigans that happened in the House, normally we run around and get a whole bunch of people to sign up. pretty much once they came back and the Democrats were there, everybody just rushed to get like 3 signatures and throw it in to get it introduced.
They are still signing on, though, I would say.
Mhm.
I've met recently with Representative Cha and Representative Singh. Neither of whom has ever signed on to our bills before. They're both DFL. They liked talking about what we were doing. They particularly liked hearing about connecting people to those programs. Give them specifics. Neither of them are Greater Minnesota representatives. They're both from. They both asked to get on the board. So there are notes being struck this year. So when you talk to your legislators, there are reasons why they would sign up. I was really kind of struck that they never bothered asking them because they have not been all that receptive to hearing about it. This year they specifically asked to be a part of this. So it's a different vibe.
Yeah.
This year.
So I always encourage that. And when they sign on to bills, honestly, it gives them a little bit more ownership. And so that's why, we always really encourage people to ask them to sign on. And then remind them again, you're going to hear me say this over and over again. We've got to get a legacy bill done. We've got to get the LCCMR bill done. No worries right now, but it has to happen. So what else is happening? Policy. I know, it just feels, does anybody have any questions? I'm just talking and talking and talking, which I love to do, as y'all know. But, okay, yeah, we all know I love to talk. I've been called motor mouth since I was 3.
Well, I have a question, but I can save it till the end.
Okay, that sounds good. Why don't we do that? Okay. So policy, for those of you, and thank you very much if you did, who tuned into my January forum on the legislature, you heard me express concerns about eminent domain maybe popping up this legislative session. Cross your fingers. We're not even going to mention that word when we're talking to people because it hasn't. Again, things are slow, so I am watching very carefully. But as of today, nothing has been introduced on that. Trust me, this is why I want you to watch your alerts throughout the legislative session. If something does get introduced, you will hear it from me. But so far, the legislator who threatened to introduce something on it has not. So, we're not going to talk about Bruno or eminent domain. One thing I will say, and it's just odd, and it may come up in your conversations, I don't know if it will. There seems to be a strange fixation on overhead costs. And I sometimes think that some legislators may not understand what it takes to run things and not run things. It's obviously, always important to look at, can you run your organization leaner, or are there things that we shouldn't be spending money on? But there's bills, for example, that Senator Green has introduced that would sort of bar any spending of legacy money on overhead. And we're not commenting on it. We're going to be listening and watching very closely because I do worry about, would they see the commission as overhead? Would they see some of what your parks branch is asking as overhead? So we're going to watch it. If we need to say something about it, I will let you know. This is one of those weird issues. And the only reason I'm even mentioning it to you is in case somebody brings it up with you. And if somebody does, just remind them how lean your organization is, how lean the commission is. That the money that is being spent is what it takes to run organizations, but it's not like any of us are running hog wild, buying fancy lunches, buying expensive computer equipment or anything like that. It's a little bit of a weird fixation. The other thing, and again, I think I talked to Jessica and Jeff from Rochester both about this. We still haven't seen these bills. I'm a little bit worried, and I see our friend from Eden Prairie. You probably have as much to, not that you're there anymore, to worry about as we do in Greater Minnesota, but there is a package of housing bills that are going to be introduced soon. I have seen the initial versions of these bills. There's one particular bill that would have made park dedication impossible. It sounds like that they are not, at least initially, going to be introducing that one. I am concerned about it because when I'm not wearing my Parks and Trails hat, I'm wearing my land use hat for the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities. And myself and my colleague Darielle are meeting with the author of that bill later this week and are going to be patiently spending time explaining to her why park dedication and things like that are extremely important. Trust me, if anything like that moves forward, you will be hearing from me about it, and I will be asking you all to reach out to your legislators on it. We're also watching in these bills to make sure that, there's, without getting into these bills too much because they haven't been released, we also have concerns about, sort of some of the zoning choices they may make that may make it harder to build parks or trails for the base, there's housing, like further away from things, and I know a lot of you take pride, you know, because I think a lot of Minnesota cities do about your ability to have a park within 10 minutes of everybody, you know, and so we're watching these bills closely, but we're in this very weird situation where we haven't seen them yet. So I can't tell you exactly. I've seen initial drafts, but we don't like to battle back against things until they're introduced. It is an issue. Again, I apologize that I really honestly thought we'd know what they look like and have this when I scheduled this date, but we don't. But stay tuned because I think it really will or really could impact parks and trails if we're not careful. Taxes. Okay, this is a really in the weeds issue, but I'm gonna bring it up because if the bill is being heard tomorrow, you don't need to say anything to your legislator unless maybe you're Rochester, and I'll talk to you later about that, Jeff. But local sales taxes. Some of you probably know this, or maybe you don't know it, but your local city or county may have a sales tax that helps provide money for parks and trails projects. And it can be very controversial at the legislature. There's basically a moratorium on them right now where you can't impose new ones. And so there's this whole big discussion about who should be allowed to impose them and for what should they be allowed to impose them on. And basically they're trying to create an expedited process where you can seek to impose a local sales tax without going to the legislature. You'd still need to go to your voters. You can't impose these without asking your voters. But the question becomes, if they do this expedited process, what would qualify? I am not going to bore you with all of the time that I have spent on this issue, all the time that Renee has spent on this issue, all the time my colleagues Shannon and Brad, who really don't care that they love parks and trails, but they don't care that much about the issue. We spent a lot of time with them trying to help them get it straight. Unfortunately, the tax legislators don't seem to understand parks and trails. We have come up with a very simple solution for them that we think is the most clean-cut way to do it. And that is, if you have a designated park or trail, you should be able to use the expedited process for that. What that does is two things. One, you don't have to take any extra steps to prove that your park and trail is regional. You've already done that. It's been judged by a great group of people. The second thing it does, and the reason we would like to have only designated parks and trails qualify for that without having to go to the legislature, is that we haven't had this happen in a couple years, but every couple of years, we'll get a legislator who will see all the great recommendations the commission made and be like, you know, park and trail in my area is better. Might not be designated, might even be a local one, but they added it into the legacy bill. And it's what my concern is that if you have two separate processes, is that some people will try to sneak around the commission process and go to the tax process. It would become very confusing. So that's why we are making this recommendation. I got 5 minutes. I just love to talk. So, again, you don't need to do anything about this unless you're a legislator. And right now, I think it's only Rochester that may be concerned about that. Senator House Childish carrying our amendment. We continue to work on it. I get Carlin too. You're almost dead. I forget about that. I spent a lot of time talking to Rochester about this. So I want you to know it's out there. We'll get it done. And if you're really wondering where am I spending a lot of my time, it's this. Sorry. How can you stay involved? Connect with your legislator. Again, always better to get to know them before you need to ask for them. Ask them to support our legislation. Have the House member sign on. We are still doing, it should say, not bi-monthly, or excuse me, monthly. I forgot to change that from an earlier one. Our next forum will be on March 14th. Watch for updates, respond to action alerts. Always contact me, by the way, if you have questions, and talk to your city and county staff and electeds that aren't here. Ask them for their support. You know, you may not know your legislator that well, but your mayor or your city council member or whomever may know them better. So relationships really are the name of the game of the legislature. So always important to talk to people. Sorry, I'm going the wrong way. Questions? Do you have questions? Gina.
Okay, so it was kind of a preconceived notion of mine that if my local representatives weren't on the committee that the bill was in front of, that it wasn't important for me to talk to them. Can you just address that preconception of mine? There's a hesitancy, like, well, it really doesn't matter because they're not on the committee.
Okay, I'm going to the question for the Zoom, but Gina's question is that what if my member is not on legacy, or not on environment, which are the committees we care about. That's one committee in the Senate, 2 committees in the House. It still matters because a couple different things. All bills have to go to the floor, and we need to make sure that we get their vote on the bill when it's on the floor. Second thing is, even if they're not on that committee, they can still talk to the legislators who run the committee. Now, I'm gonna pick on Parker here, but Senator France, not on legacy. Senator France talks to Senator Housechild a lot. Senator France can go to Senator Housechild and say, hey, can you make sure that this gets moving forward? So they talk to other people. They also, once a week, get together in that mysterious thing called a caucus. And they all talk together. And even though somebody's, sometimes, doesn't always that happen, Senator France is not on the legacy committee because he's on a lot of committees and is overburdened. There's other legislators, not going to name any names, who might not be on the committee because their caucus realizes it might be a bad idea. And so they'll be in caucus and they might say, not that any of your legislators are like that, but you never know. So it's always really good for your legislators to know sort of what's going on. That's why you should talk to them regardless of whether they're on the committee. Renee.
And one other thing, generally, our focus is always in the beginning of the year, talk to all of those legislators on the legacy committee. But what we hear a lot, and I hear a lot more every year from those people on those committees, I like parks and trails, but I don't like parks because I have an issue with the way those grants happen. I don't like the Outdoor Heritage Fund. I don't like the Water Fund. So there are a certain number of people that are going to vote against that omnibus legacy bill because they don't like a particular fund. And my pointed message lately has been, you have to vote because you like parks and trails and we need to send a message. We can't take any. So you need to vote for this overall package. Suck it up. It can't go someplace else. You will talk to a lot of people who say, I would rather build a library than this other thing. Rather fix a road. Well, you can't. And you don't even need to be particularly polite about that anymore. I've been putting around for the last couple of years and trying to start saying, that's great, but you are just wrong. It can't go anywhere, so quit talking about this because you have to vote for it. It only makes sense. And if you like this park and trail in your district, who's going to fund, you have to suck it up and vote for it. So that is the message we have to get across to all of these people, because when it comes to the floor vote, you can't just depend on the smaller communities. You have to have people who need this bill for legacy, who just never wanted it in the first place. Remind them how many people in their district voted for it, that they represent their district, and they need to vote for this bill. I've gone in to represent Senator Green, who was still a representative. He hates legacy, fiber of his body. But he admitted to me this year he did like parks and trails and he might be. That happens, I swear to God.
Oh my God, if Senator Green votes for it, we are going to have a celebration.
Right.
Maybe in his district.
That's why it's important for you to talk to those people. Don't take it for granted because they like parks and trails. But when they get to the House floor, all bets are off for the Senate. You have to. So we have to tell them their hatred of legacy and all the fearful things doesn't count. What counts is what they vote. So, right. Enough on that. But
Any other questions? I thought I saw a hand. Oh, Jeff.
Yeah, so we have been pretty successful with outdoor recreation grants. Which I think is state and federal. Has there been any grant money from that?
We have the DNR coming in, and I bet that's a great question for us to ask them. So I haven't. It's been trying to just track a lot of the money down. I'll be honest, I've been paying more attention to what's happening to our wastewater money because that's much larger. But that's a great question to talk to the DNR since they'll be here. So, Sarah.
Yeah, just the March 14th forum. Is that link on the website?
We have not created the link yet. We will get that set up and on the website.
Okay, perfect.
And we will send out notices about it in advance. So, but great questions. Any other questions? I'm going to hand it over to Renee while I go grab some coffee. So Renee is going to talk, and then Gina will introduce our next speaker, who I see just arrived. We're very excited about it. So,
okay. So it's good to see everybody today. Most everybody in this room, I'm pretty sure, has either had grants now or you're looking to get some in the future. And so we talk about the grant dollars every year. Elizabeth did a great job of describing the perils of everything. 2020, the 40-40-20, getting the bills passed. Just backing up a little bit, isn't totally part of my presentation, but I do want to just remind you of the funding for the commission and also that DNR fee. And for those of you not familiar, because you may not need to get in the weeds about it, the commission is not a fiscal agent. It's 13 individuals appointed by a governor to a governor's commission. There's no staff. Joe and I are both contract employees. There's no fleet vehicles, there are no offices, there are no computers that belong to the commission. There's one that does invoicing, but that's only because I have a computer like it. But we are a nimble organization and we are not a government agency. So the idea that DNR was charging us 2.5% of the total amount, remember it started off as a total of 20%, the DNR could charge up to 2.5% for administering the grants. All of you that have had contracts know the money goes through the commission and ends up at the DNR to write the contract, which I think we can all agree is a boilerplate contract. It's plug and play. And we love the grant staff there. They are amazing. In the early days, when there was a lot less money in the Parks and Trails Fund, because of course, over time, those tax collections grew. That 2.5% went from something that was pretty innocuous to this year, based on the numbers we have, it's going to be about $330,000 per year in the biennium. Per year, so $660,000 in the biennium is what the DNR can charge us for administering our grants.
And how many grants typically?
This is open grants. So we do about 15 to 16 grants here. Some are very simple. Equipment grants are enough. That doesn't take much. We're going to send the grant contract out. Someone fills out one piece of paperwork and you get reimbursed. At any time, we have about 45 open grants. So something that may be calling the grant staff for. That's not a lot. 3 years ago, we embarked on the journey of saying the contract actually says 2.5% of actual costs. It's funny how every year those actual costs exactly equal whatever that 2.5% off the top is. So there was some difficult back and forth, and eventually they took off our administrative fee. So that that came off. So it reduced that 2.5% a little bit, but it's still a lot of money. It's still $330,000 a year. And after 3 years now of talking and asking and begging and pleading to come up with something that seemed more fair to us, we're not saying we shouldn't pay a fee for that. Of course we should. That's fair. But LCCMR pays a flat fee, and their flat fee is $280,000 per year per biennium. Gina asked how many grants are open on the Greater Minnesota side, 45 on average during a 3-year time span that they're dealing with all of these grants. LCCMR is 167. So clearly they should be paying more. So we unable to come to an agreeable amount of money and introduced a bill that we're talking about. It does allocate our funds through the DNR. It also carries a line item that says we will pay $140,000 per year of the biennium to administer grants. Seems fair. So when you're asked about that, the difference is that $330,000 to $140,000 seems fair. We're not trying to chisel anyone. And I will tell you that the conversations I've had with many people this year, on both sides of the aisle, in the House and the Senate, have been, that's a lot of money. Didn't you reduce it? But we're not going to ask for that. We think 140 is fair. That's the reduction. So when you think about those dollars, those are, and you talk to your legislators, it's important to remind them that we're not a heavy agency. There's a lot of talk this session, as Elizabeth alluded to, about broad-based abuse, which we're seeing on the federal level, right? Going in with chainsaws, cutting things with no line to that. So I'm hearing a little bit about that too. That's that overhead. We don't have that. We really don't. It's a pretty lean amount of money. When you look at asking for $500,000 per year in the biennium, $1 million in the biennium for operating, that's for contract workers. That's for things like Bill Bott any of you took advantage of this seminar last week, I guess. Bill is an accessibility expert. He's on contract for us this year as he will be doing 4 forums open to everybody. It's not, we don't want to contain this to people that are designated. You know, in our funding applications, we expect you to meet the ADA standards and exceed them. Well, if we don't even know what the ADA standards really are, how can you exceed, right? So this is our attempt to make sure that we're all familiar with what those standards are, and Bill will tell you, the man who's been in a wheelchair for most of his life, those standards are C at best, grade of a C. We need to get this on things, and there are many, many, many things that we can do to make life easier for people hearing sight, to make them able to enjoy our spaces the way that those of us who are able-bodied have all of our senses right to do. So Bill will be doing those 4 forums. He'll also be doing for us a review of plans when we have new facilities coming to us that have a grant. We want him to look at those plans and make sure that those standards are being exceeded. Because interestingly enough, your architect, your landscape designer, your engineer did not need to take classes on accessibility. It's not required. That's shocking. So they know the basics too, but they don't know this extra standard we want to get to. To further that, we're going to make dollars available to all of you so that you can do those small fixes that make life easier, like automatic door openers. Every time I go somewhere with my hands full, I think this is an inconvenience to me because I have to put something down. It's a real inconvenience to everybody who's not able-bodied. If you have to be in a chair somewhere, you have to struggle for that door. That's a lot to ask for, especially in our climate. When you think it's terrible getting around. I mean, great, we have curb cuts. We don't shovel them in the winter. We're not consistent about that. So we want to help you get to that level of exceeding NDA. We're going to make grant dollars available for that. We're going to make them available on a rolling basis. So they're not just something you can apply for between April 1st and July 31st. It's something you can apply for all year. We're going to keep that match very, very low so that it's very affordable. Then, timing of that is when we find out what the final dollars are. We should get the February forecast soon. So we'll know what those final dollars are. The commission is meeting next month to decide some tweaks to our funding application that are hopefully going to make it easier to wade through. Over the years, we've created Frankenstein. We had something here and there. Don't take it off. So instead of nice, clear guidelines, you've got 72 pages to wade through. We're changing that. We're also going to change the language around those grants. So the finals are coming, but we're hoping for a minimum of $200,000 available for those accessibility grants, and that's not a ton. It'll go fast, but it's something. We hope to increase it every year. We hope that by having a lot, we can increase all of our understanding about that. And also along those same lines, those environmental and archaeological grants, we hope to refund that again. Find the final numbers over $100,000 last year, something like that. So we hope to fund that to a higher level as well. So, you know, when people ask where those dollars go, they go to making sure we can do these kinds of things. And remember too, when we had 3 grants, remember we did the wheelchair, the track wheelchair grants, and we sent out, made that available to everybody, and we had 3 cities apply for track wheelchair grants. We had the dollars available in grant budget to fund 2 of those grants. We had Lyon County, we had Wright County, we had Duluth, all applied for grants for that. The commissioners decided that it was too important not to fund all 3. So we took funds out of our operating budget to pay for that share. Those are the kinds of things that being nimble and not bureaucratic enable us to do. And I don't say bureaucratic in a big B bad way. It's just that these are 13 people who are common sense. If something's not working, because we hear from our constituents, this is a weird thing about your funding, or this doesn't make sense, or it doesn't seem fair for smaller communities. The commissioners can sit down at one meeting and say, you know what, we're hearing some feedback, so let's change that. And it takes us 2 meetings. It doesn't take us weeks of public hearings and meetings to get around it. So it's a nimble group, and they want to do the right thing for everybody. Because remember, there's only 9 years left. When legacy go away. So, not to bring everyone down, that's scary. We've got a group of people now who, if they don't like something in these four funds, it's not, they're gonna push for it. So those things are happening. So I'll check my time because I have about a minute left here. You haven't gotten our new 2024 policy and planning report. An additional 4 pages this year to talk about some things, not just our funding anymore, not just what's in the districts, but about things that are coming up and that we're doing besides that. So accessibility is talked about in here. We talk about free equipment use days. Those of you who have had equipment grants from us, this came up last year in committee. Again, it's a very nimble thing. One of the House members said, "What if I've got families that can't afford to rent equipment? How does that work?" So some of you served and we talked about this. How do we figure out how to make equipment available for no charge? And we came up with a formula. If you get an equipment grant, we expect you, if it's seasonal, to have X number of days during the season. Some of those days have to be a weekend. And if it's a piece of equipment that can be used all year, same thing sort of holds, but it's more days. We wanted to talk about that because we are, as far as I know, the only agency that addressed that in committee. So that's also in the report is the value statement for and accessibility are somewhat similar, but including is making sure that everybody has the same opportunity, and accessibility is making sure that our parks and trails are accessible to get you there. So we felt it was important, since we're hiring Bill Lotthamer, to talk about that and to outline the 6 principles that we want to do to get to that, to help our partners make sure that things are accessible and inclusive for everybody. So those are talked about here. And then finally, we're talking about some of the things that we're doing that affect everybody in a positive way. The International Mountain Bicycling, not biking, I know bicycling sounds weird, but that is their name, association, has held their trail labs. So IMBA's held their trail labs in Bentonville, Arkansas, or whatever. Why do they do it there? Because the Walton grandsons have a ton of money. They wanted to spend it building world-class mountain bike trails throughout them. They've done that. They've been very successful. But now they've moved on to rock climbing. So they're not funding the IMBA trail labs there like they haven't been. So they've moved out of Bentonville only 2 other times in the past 10 or 12 years. And when I heard that they were leaving Bentonville, we got to know them, a lot of folks, pretty well when they were developing that mountain trail development guidelines. Called them up and said, "Hey, I hear you're homeless. Would you like to move these trail labs to Duluth?" I mean, Duluth is one, but to Minnesota. And they said, "Well, great." So we have a 3-year commitment from IMBA to host their trail labs in the state of Minnesota. The first one is going to take place in May and then October and Duluth. Those locations will probably move around, but here's the benefit to everybody. So we went out and found it. Duluth is often running, making sure they get the arrangements taken care of. You can send people to those trail labs for a lot less money if you're in Minnesota. What a bet. And we can get more Minnesotans there. If you're the communities hosting it, the economic benefit to your community to have those folks coming in. And next year, when we get those trail care labs where you're actually working, they're teaching people how to maintain trails. Trails in your community are going to get worked on by people who want to build those trails. So there's an added benefit. So those are the sorts of things we're doing beyond the work that we're tasked with, which is to designate as regionally significant parks and trails in Greater Minnesota, and then make funding available through legacy to those designated facilities. There are 80 now through the legacy groups, branching out and doing things that I hope affect you all in a more positive light and also results. So this is your guide to that. We have to add 4 pages this year to talk about it. Legislators like it. I think they like touching the cover. I think Renee does. I like touching the cover. But we like it that and Lily, every year we're testifying, which will be tomorrow in the House. He's not the chair anymore, sadly, but he used to hold our guide up and say, DNR and Met Council, can't you do something like this with fewer words and more pictures? So anyways, be sure you take one of these along. If you have any questions, you know how to get. Thank you all for your partnership. Thank you all for your and something we can all be together proud of because we have world class facilities and great so that we could not otherwise have. Something.
Thanks, Renee. Renee and the commission do outstanding work, and thanks for being here today. Before I introduce our next speaker, I have a really quick, really easy trivia. So 2 questions. First question, when is the best time to plant a tree?
Spring or fall.
10 years ago. I've heard 20. So second question, when is the second best time to plant a tree?
Yes,
Today. Excellent. So this relates to our next speaker because the best time to have engaged with tribal voices was probably when this group formed. None of us were around. So we're starting now, and I think it couldn't be more timely, especially as many of us are realizing and striving to honor the cultural significance that characterizes the land that we manage. We thought it was a great time to hear from the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council. So here today to speak with us is Brandon Alkire, and he is the Legislative Director for MIAX. If you've ever heard that acronym before, that's the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council. So welcome.
Yes, thank you, and thank you, everybody. Brandon, yes.
The first time?
I don't remember, but thank you, and thank you, everybody. I just want to.
Yeah.
Oh, because the camera. I was watching you guys get filmed over there on the camera, so that was really funny. So I want to start by saying thank you for the invitation. This is exactly what we do at the Indian Affairs Council, look to build partnerships with different groups, looking at your guys' agenda, see how it aligns with our core values, and then go from there. So a little bit about me. My name is Brandon Alkire. I am my Dakota name is Lame Deer, but I'm a Dakota citizen from the Standing Rock Sioux tribe. Does anyone know where that's at? It's in North Dakota. So it's a very big reservation. And I'll get to more of that, but it's very underdeveloped and purposely underdeveloped for the purposes that you guys are talking about today within your communities of beautifying and creating a space for people to enjoy. So I'm the legislative director for the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council. I'm also a United States Navy veteran, 10 years aboard a ship. I'd never want to do that again, but it was fun when I was there. I'm also a lawyer, and my specialty is federal Indian law. And then I'm a dad, which is the hardest job I've ever had. So that is me in a nutshell. As I was preparing for this meeting today, and hopefully bringing some items of interest to you guys as you go and talk to our legislators, I just wanted to keep a couple things in mind is how to build better partnerships with our tribal communities within the state. So as you're planning out your parks or whatever you're planning to do, that's really interesting with the Arkansas thing is that's a really cool thing. I just want to know how we're going to be part of that too. So I was really pondering what makes Minnesota beautiful. But you know, we have one of the most beautiful states in the union. And that's not an opinion or conjecture, that is a fact, in my opinion. It's really about our natural resources. I've lived every place in the United States from both the Navy and then just like college and travel, lived on both coasts. I always come home. And so, and why do I come home? Because this is a beautiful state. We have our natural landscapes. I'm always thinking about our North Shore group, our Lake City relatives, our Red Wing Bluffs. I mean, these are just beautiful places we want to preserve and protect because we enjoy them, right? Rock climbing, trail hiking. I do a lot of biking with my kids. Usually I'm far behind them as they're going, but it's a lot of fun. Our parks, and I would say for the most part, our people. When we get along, we tend to have a really amazing state, right? And we need to build off of that in more ways than one. So we find that with many of the partnerships we're building currently, it has really put forth some amazing work and maybe a better foundation from where we can all launch to help preserve some of these pieces. I'm going to riddle off a couple statistics further in, but before I talk about building the partnership with Maya, you probably want to know who the hell we are. So let me start there. We are, we're a state agency, first and foremost. We were created in 1962 in response to a federal relocation program that brought many Native American people from tribal lands to urban areas. And so when they arrived here, and I will use Little Earth as an example, when they arrived here, they found that they didn't have all the stuff that was promised from the federal level. And so they ended up putting together the consortiums to survive, like they would call the police, for example, and police would not show up. They were seeking other housing initiatives. There was none available because of their status as a Native American. There was a whole host of problems there. So they got together and formed the first Native American Council, which is the Native American Council. It was later codified that year, 1963, under statute 3.922. So we've been providing services for this state of Minnesota for almost 62 years this year. We're super excited by that. We're unique in that we're the first type of agency like this that existed nationally. We're currently still the only unique agency that is governed by a board of elected tribal leaders. And so we don't answer to commissioners. Commissioners, in fact, are on our board as a way to work with us through a government-to-government relationship. The purpose of our agency was to be the first liaison between both the state, the 11 tribal nations, the urban population, and the Native American orgs. And this is still a mission, a core value within our mission that we're committed to building relationships. And when they come and talk to you, we want to see a different perspective. How can we help with this? It's a lot of the questions we tend to ask ourselves. I mentioned that we were unique. The composition of our board is one example of that uniqueness. Currently, we have 10 of the 11 tribal nations who sit on our board. I'm going to pause right here for a second because I said 10 of 11. One tribe, the Upper Sioux, chooses not to engage with the Indian Affairs Council, which is very much their sovereign right. This doesn't mean that Lower Sioux seat goes away, or that they have the ability to not or to re-engage at some future date. They do, but they are exercising their sovereign right now to engage. So we still send them updates. Here's what's happening. They can choose whether or not to respond. And if at some future date they want to re-engage, they are welcome. Their seat is waiting. I mentioned that we have commissioners sitting on our board. This includes all those core agencies like health, DNR, DHS, education, and so on and so forth. We also have state legislators that sit on our board. Because we're a nonpartisan group, it's one from each party. So currently we have Senator Kurdish from the DFL, Senator IQ from the GOP, Representative Keeler from the DFL, and Representative Hudson from the GOP. Our agency, since the time of its inception, has grown significantly, as well as our purview. We have taken on a robust language revitalization program, which is coming up. Our cultural resource department, which probably fits into the work that you all do here, which oversees our Minnesota Statute 307.08, which is the Graves Protection Act named from. So a lot of these, our cultural resource department is grown by leaps and bounds in the last couple of years with the development projects that are going through. My position is fairly new. It's about 3 years old. And that's the legislative director. We also have our Urban Indian Advisory Board, which is an arm of MIAC, and then many other partnerships we built throughout the state. So our mission and values are centered on our Native American identity. And what this means is we recognize that for relationship building, that is a core tenet of sovereignty. We have to have relationships to build out our partnerships, our relationships. And so they tasked me to come out and meet with you, find folks to see how we can build these kind of partnerships. And one of our core values is the protection of our natural resources. Again, I was gonna, you know what, let me just riddle it out right now. So we have, I think I shared this with you, Elizabeth, it's just mind-blowing. Some of our core pieces is Native American jurisdiction accounts for about 6% of the national land base, or about 100 million acres. Here in Minnesota, we have approximately 4% of the land base, or about 2 million acres. Now that's counting the reservations like Red Lake, White Earth, Fond du Lac, so on and so forth. Nationally, though, and more interestingly, is that 80% of the national biodiversity is all on tribal. And it's there because we have some of our core cultural values that dictates how we take care and become a steward of the land. So we approached development plans with a few considerations. The biggest is how, thinking 7 generations down, how are our decisions today going to impact the future version of us? And so if we can't say that it's here for everyone to enjoy in future generations, then we won't go. One of our biggest pieces is that we never overuse, take or develop, and only develop when necessary. So a lot of these values do fall in line with why parks are important, what makes our state beautiful. So we understand that being a good steward of the land means to be a good relative and a good leader. So those are core values we're hoping to build with you guys as you're looking to develop your parks within your respective area. We also recognize that a lot of the parks and trails, we are in a huge campaign to get more people out on parks and trails, just because of the health disparities that exist within tribal communities. We're hoping that we can lower those by getting people more in the exercising mood. And if you don't do that in a city, right? City exercise is kind of icky. So, and I've been to New York, and no, thank you. So we encourage many of our people to get out. We also have many of our community members that designated different walking trails using sacred sites as a way to get our people more out the door to do something. So we do have friends within our travel and tourism group that are building out some of the locations that would be a place where tribal communities can engage with partnerships with people in the surrounding areas. Keep that in mind as you're going to talk over there. You hear a thought process that, hey, we might be able to do something like this. Keep in mind, tribes might also be a good partner in that kind of engagement. And with that, I will just pause. I know I have like a tons of stuff here, but I don't take questions. Does anyone have questions?
Brandon, this is really interesting. I'm glad you're here today. You know, I shouldn't say no. I'd like to make you aware that last year, the legislation statute was changed for the commission when it was established to its cities and counties to designate as regionally significant parks and trails. The language was changed last year to private governments and then to talk to nonprofit agencies. I've met with Oklina. Unfortunately, our schedules haven't been aligning to your calendar to talk about it, but I'm hoping there's a way we can work really closely to make sure that that information is out to all 11 tribal nations. And effectively have a conversation about what needs and how we can interact together operatively.
Absolutely. And there is, I mean, we keep in mind, so the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council, we sit in almost every space because tribal nations are a whole nation. So it's not like we're just related to health or education. We sit, and I'll give you an example here. I was sitting at Stearns County Park Board or Commissions and Planning Board talking about a land that was being put forth for development into plats, and we couldn't because it's been designated a cemetery. And so that's the kind of spaces we're in. That's under our NAGPRA 307.08. And we're obligated to fulfill those. And I think I see a few Stearns County people back there. So, so if we're sitting in spaces like that, so we'll leave a meeting like Stearns County and then run to a school board meeting and then talk about, you know, some of the other legislation that has come through that we're trying to like, okay, so here's how you do that. Here's how you engage with tribal nations. Here's the conversation you can have to start that conversation. So as I'm saying this to you guys, keep in mind that that is something we do. Whatever you're asking, we probably do it. And we are more than happy to help guide you guys through this process. Whatever process you're building or doing, we're here. We're here as the technical assistants. We are mandated by statute to assist in state agencies, counties, and municipalities. So keep that in mind. Just reach out to us. We're happy to answer questions or even have a meeting. And maybe give you a different perspective on something that you might not have thought of that might be a little bit grander. I'm still curious about the whole Walton group committee. I'm so excited for that. So, any other questions?
I'm from the city of Duluth, so we have been working on its naming and renaming of parks, trails, and things. And our process is kind of engagement with our native tribe communities, and we have an Indigenous Commission and a Homeless Commission as well. I'm just wondering if the Indian Affairs Council has experience in assisting communities with naming processes in Indigenous language.
Yes and no. I would say yes, we could point you in the right direction because we do the language revitalization grades. So let me back up a little bit. So 2023 became the passing of 10.65, which required state agencies to do consultation. And so within that, I know you have DNR coming, and DNR has, within that statute, they required a state tribal liaison to be implanted in all areas. And so I would probably point to DNR or someplace like that for that kind of information. We don't directly do those kind of works because we try to keep it at a government to government level, but we do offer guidance, and so we would give you some point to different people to go back and we're more than happy to help you walk through the process too, as far as finding the right person or how do you want to do it, that kind of stuff. We're here for you. Anybody else?
It's so good to have you here because I get so many questions answered. It's fun. So, in our guidance for grant for funding, we, of course, communities have to consult a SHPA, and we say that we highly encourage you to consult with SHPA. Some, there are a lot of cities and counties that are much more attuned to that, and just automatically say, of course. What is the most effective way for us to direct people who are asking us that question about where they go? We don't know where the grants are going to be coming from unless we're given what projects are going to be like. We do want to make sure that if consultation is wanted by that community, which we strongly encourage, again, ADA is one thing, where if we don't know exactly what it is, how is our best way to consult? I know Gina's got a ton of experience doing this, but we want to become better as well. So is that anything that goes through my head?
Well,
And forgive my ignorance, but.
no, I
Captives audience.
No, and I appreciate the question. Possibly is the question, is the answer, like the short answer, just because we always ask if it's a development project, reach out to us and we'll let you know if the area you're looking to develop sits on, if there's sacred sites. So we work really close with OSA and DNR and DOT for this exact purpose. And generally we'll say no, right? Like, no, there's nothing there, go ahead and, move on. But with, again, it depends on the situation. We always, if it's a project leaning towards a tribal land with maybe known or possible sacred sites, then we would, I would say, contact this person. So reach out to us is the answer. We're happy to have that conversation. Our review process is 45 days, just so we're clear. And within that 45 days, we usually get them done way quicker. But within that 45 days, we'll let you know if your project might run into a bump in the road because of the sacred site or a findings. So we're here for you.
Can I just follow up on that? So do we encounter this often? So are you suggesting that we start with the Indian Affairs Council for like check one and then go to TIPO if the answer is yes? For us, when we're especially on federal funding, they mandate it. I mean,
Right.
testing and everything. So I mean, this is a new revelation for me that I haven't out.
New revelation, not a new statute. And so it's just, we're just now like making sure we're doing a lot of trainings with our county attorneys. Because they didn't realize that this was in place and has been in place for several years, a couple decades actually. And they were talking about the enforceability. So to answer your question is, during your development process, depending on where your funding has come from, you probably should just like keep us in mind as we don't have to be number one, but somewhere close to the top. As a way to check that box and say, okay, we checked in, there's nothing. One rule of thumb with your development process, if you're building by water, that's generally where you're going to find these kind of artifacts and sacred sites, burial grounds. So keep that in mind as you're looking for your development plan. Shit, we're by water, I better call. Otherwise, it's going to turn into something ugly. And then we're all going to be sitting here like. So just keep that in mind. Reach out to us. We're happy. We're happy to help with anything. So we're an asset to you guys as well. With that, I will say thank you. I see our other speakers are coming in. So thank you guys.
Thank you,
Thank
Brandon.
you.
Really great to have you here.
And my contact information is with you. So if you don't mind sharing it.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks
So-
for that.
Thank you guys.
Brandon.
Thank you, Brandon. That was great. I really appreciate it. So. Our food is here. So I don't know if we want to, I don't know where it actually is. I think it's in our. Okay. Wait, we can wait for all 12 if that's people okay having the DNR speak and then we'll set it up.
Yeah,
Okay,
I think that's
okay, great. Sounds good. Okay.
Thanks. Well, that was great timing. So we can segue into our next speakers. We're really glad to welcome the DNR back with us today to talk about their legislative priorities and framework. So of course with us is Commissioner Sarah Strommen and Assistant Commissioner Shannon Lotthamer. And many of you know both of them already, especially since Sarah has been appointed as commissioner since 2019. And before that, she was the assistant commissioner. So she's been around a while and she's been in natural resources for a while. And I'm not saying that, and I'm saying that in a highly complimentary way, right? Well, you and me both. So, you know, before she was actually with the DNR, she was with the Board of Soil and Water Resources. I'm a past conservation district employee, so we're practically related, right? And then she also worked for the Friends of the Boundary Waters. I'm a member. I mean, like I said, practically sisters. And then she has been a mayor. So I don't know what else you've not done, but she comes in with a lot of perspectives and she knows what it's like to work in local government too. So she's a great person to talk to. And then Shannon is the one who oversees the division of Parks and Trails, Forestry, and Operations. But she was also very into water resources. She oversaw the programs at the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency before coming to the DNR. So a couple of great people working for the DNR with a lot of good natural resource baseline to do their work from. So we appreciate having both of them here. And I just want to mention something else that Elizabeth stated about Shannon is that you have a reputation of being a good listener to all stakeholders and really working to find resolutions to problems. So thank you for being here because I've got problems. Anyway, we value the relationship that we've had with the DNR and glad to have you here. We'll try and save time at the end for questions and I'll just pass it off to both of you.
Perfect. We're gonna tag team. So, thank you so much for having us. It does feel like an annual tradition. I know, I'm not sure where to stand with this thing. It does, yeah, I'll make it stand over this. It does feel like an annual tradition, to be here with you all. So, hopefully, you all appreciate it. I know I do. And, we too value the relationship, that we have. And, you know, you all, individually and collectively are really important partners, for DNR. And Shannon and I both believe that very strongly, our whole leadership team, and obviously the folks in the divisions that you all work with. So that's true today, and that's true every single day. And so thank you for what you do to provide outdoor recreation and parks and trails experiences for Minnesotans and for that partnership with the state. So we want to talk a little bit about legislative priorities and what that means in this current context, and then a little bit about our Get Out More, which I know we've talked with you about. And do want time for questions, and then we will be out of here promptly to keep you on agenda and keep ourselves on schedule today. So first of all, I think we'll just touch on budget a little bit, and as many of you are probably aware, and you will certainly realize in your conversations with the legislators, this is a little bit of an unusual year at the Minnesota legislature. One, because of the very close dynamics between the parties in both the House and the Senate, and sort of this unique power sharing or near power sharing that has been necessary. And in particular, the House getting off to a little bit of a late start. And so they are really just getting going in the House. And I think usually by this time, I've probably been over at the Capitol and made our budget presentations. I will be making the first one in the Senate this week. I have not been over to the Capitol at all this session. It's very odd. And that combined with a fiscal forecast that is not the one that we have gotten accustomed to the last couple of biennia, where in this current or the next upcoming biennium that they're budgeting, the legislature is budgeting for very small surplus margin, 600 million. Sounds like a lot. It was not a lot in the state budget. That is all they have to work with to a positive number. But then a $5 billion projected deficit in the second biennium of the planning horizon. And so what that means for both the governor, and you see it reflected in his budget, I think certainly we will see it reflected in the legislative budgets that come out, you will certainly hear it in conversations, is a desire and really the responsibility to start figuring out how we start curbing spending, particularly in the areas where it is growing the most, in order to prepare for that second biennium of the planning horizon. So fortunately or unfortunately, I think at DNR, we kind of had an inkling that the fiscal situation was not going to be what it was. And so we really decided we were going to focus on a budget. We don't have a lot of policy items in play this session, and really we decided to focus a lot of priority on spending the one-time money we received the last biennium, and then focus on high priority needs for this biennium. And really that's in line with the budget that the governor proposed. Making key general fund investments in this biennium, but also working to curb spending and reduce general fund where possible. So a couple things in our budget that the governor has proposed. One is some partial operating adjustment increases. So just, you know, as you all know, inflation erodes our ability to provide the same level of services each year. There is only enough room in the general fund and in our dedicated funds to partially fund those cost increases. So put in what we could afford in there. There's also a couple other operational increases around like our legal costs and some other things that are unrelated to the area we're talking about now. There are some fee proposals. There are 3 fee proposals in the governor's budget for DNR. One is around groundwater, water management. The second is around AIS surcharge. And we are proposing to move that from the flat $10.60 fee that is currently tacked on top of the 3-year vote registration. That will go to a sliding scale depending on how big your watercraft is, just like the underlying registration. So a little bit along the same idea that the bigger your watercraft, the more of the risk and the more you're going to pay into that AIS fund. The amount that is going to create is going to both allow for additional investments in AIS prevention for DNR capacity, for grants to local entities, and then it's also going to replace some general fund revenue that is proposed to go away in the governor's budget. The third fee proposal is an increase for the park and state recreation area vehicle permit. Same proposal we proposed 2 years ago. An increase from $7 to $10 on the daily permit, 35 to 45 on the annual permit. I'll be very candid, it has gotten the same cool reception that it did 2 years ago, and we haven't even presented it yet. So we are not overly optimistic. I will be honest, we are working very hard and thinking about some creative alternatives to that, because the reality is already not getting our full operating adjustment. We are behind. If we do not get that fee increase, we will be in a service reduction mode. All of that is only to stay the same. We have no new investments proposed in any of that. So we are working very hard in conversations with the legislature to figure out what might be possible as an alternative. So stay tuned for that. Yes.
Here's a good question about that. Is there's something in statute, you're prohibited from partnering with agencies for a marketing fee to offset those costs, correct? There's, like, you couldn't have, I mean, I'm not suggesting Target becomes, Target
Right.
Parks, but although they were willing to pay,
Yeah.
but you really can't do those kinds of marketing partnerships, can you?
Right now, it's one of the things under our long-term funding conversation we're looking at, like what might those public-private partnerships be? I think the real challenge for an agency like ours is Target might be acceptable. Enbridge, where we also are a regulatory authority, right, that is giving permits to those entities. Polymet, do they get to sponsor parks? So there become real issues for us because our Parks and Trails arm is also right under the same department as our regulatory arm. And so what that means and what Minnesotans might think about that. I think is a real question. I will just say that's not personally my first choice. I think we're exploring it because it's the prudent thing to do. But I will tell you, having been in states where their state parks are very much funded that way, you don't walk 2 feet and there isn't a sign telling you who paid for that trail, that bridge, that water feature, that canoe rack. And it really is distracting from the experience. That was my own personal reaction to it. But I'll just be candid, I found it really offensive. Like you literally could, there was not a thing that did not have somebody's or some entity's name on it. So that's an extreme, but good question, right? Shannon, anything else on regular budget? I guess we'll talk a little bit about bonding and legacy. Okay, so bonding, really the only thing of note is $2 million recommendation for local parks and trails grant, same amount as last year it was proposed. There was no bonding bill, so fingers crossed this year we get one. As you know, every year we miss, things are way more expensive the next year, so we get further and further behind. And then the other big piece that we're looking at, in addition to the LCCMR bill, but would be the legacy bill. And we have a joint overview presentation at the legacy committee this week, so we look forward to that opportunity. And I'll just say, I think in a session where everybody's looking for any money and any way to shift funds, I think for all of us keeping focused and on task and on message about the purpose of legacy funds is going to be really important, because I think people are going to honestly be looking at those, even though there's a constitutional prohibition against supplanting. That's a real hard thing to actually prove, and I just think people are going to be looking for money wherever it is, and so we'll need to coordinate and be united on legacy and the purpose of that, and the way that we all manage that very well together. So that's pretty much the legislative agenda. A lot of session to go in terms of work to be done, not that much time left. So, we'll see how that goes. And then the last thing I just wanted to talk a little bit about, because we've talked about this before, is our Get Out More Modernized Outdoor Recreation Experiences investment. This was $150 million that was appropriated to us 2 years ago. We have, I think I've mentioned this before too, we started that initiative by really thinking about how do we spend, how do we allocate that $150 million in a programmatic way across the 5 areas of investment, which are access and accessibility, camping and camping infrastructure, fishing and fishing infrastructure, boat ramps, and stream restoration. How do we do that in a programmatic way? So it's not just project, but it's something that really collectively adds up to something that is transformational for Minnesotans in their outdoor recreation experiences and state facilities. And so we took some time to do that. All of the $150 million has been allocated, not spent. So we are also watching very carefully as people are thinking, we've already heard legislators thinking about how they could reprogram our unspent dollars, but it is all allocated. And all of the allocation decisions are on our Get Out More webpage and our website, so you can go see what might be in your area. We also, because we were required to, submitted a really nice report, which is also on our website. We submitted this to the legislature on our progress of expending that $150 million. And so, while, as I said, a lot of it isn't spent, this report also details where it is all allocated to, where we have spent it, the way that those, initial boat ramps, the initial stream restorations, how those look and how people are able to experience that. These are real, tangible things that Minnesotans will not only see, but experience. And we know there's a lot of support for them. So that is a priority to keep the gas pedal down on that. Shannon, I think over to couple other things you wanted to talk about. Sure. Thanks, Commissioner. And thanks Tina for such a gracious introduction. Really appreciate that. And thanks for the opportunity to be here. Thanks, Elizabeth, for the invitation. Just two things that I kind of want to revisit or further emphasize from the commissioner's remarks. First, with the Get Out More, I want to point out that those decisions that we made about sort of those programmatic allocations and where that funding was going to be used those were made with a lot of input from Minnesotans and from local government and from nonprofit organizations that have an interest in those particular areas. So as you look at that information, for example, one of the things that we still need to do and still want to do is that as we're sequencing out some of this construction, particularly with things like public water accesses that have road connections and potential connections with local services and things like that we want to make sure that we're coordinating with our local partners as much as possible, both just to have sort of a seamless approach so that folks know what's going on and if it's good communication, but also if there's an opportunity to, kind of create a whole that's greater than the sum of the parts. Maybe you have a project that's going on, or you have a road issue that's happening. We're looking to reach out, and if you are aware of a project where you haven't gotten a reach out, let us know so we can make sure that we're doing that coordination, because we want to make sure that those dollars serve Minnesotans in the best way and that we get the most leverage out of those, not just for DNR managed assets, but for work with local partners as well. So I wanted to really emphasize that with this group. And then also, the commissioner talked about the difficult budget situation. I saw a lot of nodding heads, and yeah, we feel your pain because we have the same pain. And, I really think that it's these times where these kinds of partnerships and opportunities for dialogue and for connection are even more important because, we manage the outdoor recreation opportunities across Minnesota, and I mean the collectively. Our previous parks director used to talk about sort of backyard to backcountry, and you all are really connected in a lot of ways to the backyard piece and those regional pieces. And then we try to provide that additional sort of destination opportunities across the state as well, but also making those connections. And so I think it can be really tempting, and I think folks kind of try to put us into that sort of competitive situation when budgets are tight and when it's a tough time, and there's only so much resources, right? So there is a little bit of that. But I also think that now is the time when there's a lot of opportunity for creative thinking about partnership. How might we be able to take little pieces and put them together to that greater whole? Or even just, are there some coordination kinds of things that we need to do given the budget situations that we're all in, so that it can, if not sort of make everything whole, lessen the impacts and try to make sure that we're doing all that we can collectively to serve the Minnesota communities that we serve. So, not to get too Pollyanna, because I know it's a tough time, but I really, really think that these kinds of partnerships will help us get through those difficult budget times way better than without those opportunities for collaboration. So thank you for that opportunity. And I know I speak for the commissioner and for our whole commissioner's office and our leadership team that we're here to be a good partner. And we want to hear from you where those opportunities are, or where there's things that we can do.
Thank you. It's nice to put all our feet on the common ground and do our work from there. So again, thank you for being here and for taking some questions. So I'll just open it up to the group for questions.
Yeah, so I asked earlier, we got past a lot of outdoor recreation grant dollars, which I believe the grant aspect of it is 50-50 state and federal. And so I was wondering if you had heard anything about the federal grant situation, and if that did go away, the state portion still be available.
Do you want to repeat the question too for online?
Yeah, so the question is about outdoor recreation grants that are split between federal funds and state funds. And do we have an update on the availability of the federal funds? And if that part goes away, what happens to the state funds? So what I will say about the federal landscape right now is there's no clarity. You know, we have at various points been locked out of federal portals for reimbursement. The vast majority for us right now are available for, you know, money that was awarded to us that we're like entitled to. But I think we're all aware that could change. There are a couple things that are related to IRA funding that we don't have current access to. I have not heard anything specific about the outdoor rec program, so I think, you know, proceed cautiously, assuming it will be there. And I think, you know, we are doing everything we can, obviously, to hang on to state dollars. And I think where they require a match, right, those are things potentially, if we do see that disappear, we can, you know, look at what it would take to change that. But I think, you know, I talked about like the $2 million of local limits and bonding. That's not going to go very far, right, if we lose federal funds. So I just think it's something, again, collectively that we're all going to need to keep an eye on. The reality is at the federal level, those kinds, I mean, I don't think those are what's intended, right, for a target. They just make it swept. They're also a really small piece of the whole federal, you know, grant system. And so in terms of like, if the goal is to find federal savings, you're not going to find very much there. And a little bit at the state level, the same kind of thing. I think that's partly to your point of like sticking together, because if we end up competing with each other, I shouldn't say this because at some point, like somebody might take me up on it, but I don't think really, but like you could eliminate the entire DNR budget. You could eliminate the entire environment target, and it's not going to address the state deficit issue. And so what that says to me is like, why are we going to fight over crumbs, right, when it's really not solving the problem? So I think both on the federal and the state side, we just need to keep those lines of communication open, and hopefully at some point there will be more clarity.
Mine's more of a comment than a, I just want to say I really like to get outside more podcasts and really cool. It highlights a lot of things in greater Minnesota. It's free tourism marketing for us. The three that I really enjoyed were Tinfoil and Good Oil, Crop Edge to Cattail, Building Cayuna, and then February 13th, you did one on Staple. Not like we were just talking about before you got here about the two meetings that we had.
Yeah. Thank you. We're gonna do a podcast, right? Yeah, an episode. So yeah, we have a Lauren Bennett McGinty, who's the director at Explore Minnesota. She and I co-host a Explore Minnesota More podcast, and we just highlight events that are going on in the outdoor recreation space in Minnesota, or unique experiences that people may not know about in Minnesota, like ice diving. I am not going to try that, just to be clear, but fascinating that people do that. So yeah, it's a fun way to promote. Yeah, so folks have ideas too of things that we could highlight, and it is intended to highlight things across Minnesota and bring in partners. So be sure to let me know, or Randolph Riley at the at Explore Minnesota is our producer, I guess you call him, and coordinator for our outdoor recreation partnership with the state.
I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with that podcast, and I don't know if there's others who aren't, but what is it? We'll probably need to mention it one of our legislators, because it sounds wonderful. Or not our legislators, one of our newsletters. What is the podcast?
So it's called the Explore Minnesota More podcast, and it's something that Lauren Bennett McGinty and I started, I don't know, maybe a year ago.
Okay. I did not know about that.
I'll just disclaimer, we are not professional podcasters. But
I love it.
And you know, like usually in state government, you know, you have to have a whole plan and you have to do all this. We just like, let's just try this. Let's just see, like, what's the worst that could happen? We could embarrass ourselves. And I will say for me, I don't throw Lauren in. I do that every day anyway. So it's just one more way to do that. Yeah, so if you just, I think if you Google Explore,
I just found it.
yeah. And there's a number of episodes on there, super fun, conversations, with folks about various events and topics. And so, we're kind of getting to a next phase. We're actually like hiring some professional help now.
That's gonna screw the whole thing up.
I know, it probably will. It probably will. I shouldn't say this, but when we first proposed it, so it was one of the governor's pheasant openers, and Lauren and I were doing a joint interview, and we were having so much fun. We're like, we should do this more often. And she said, we should have a podcast. And I said, we should have a podcast. And our DNR communication staff were sitting there and they were like, oh, no. Their eyes are like this big. And we were like, hey, we want to do this podcast. And they were like, well, you can't just do a podcast. You have to do this. And I'm like, yeah, okay, that's way too much red tape. And so I kid you not, Lauren goes to the governor's pheasant openers, so the governor's there, and Lauren says, Governor, we're going to start an outdoor recreation podcast. And he's like, great, can I be on it? We still haven't gotten him on it. But then it was like, well, now we have to do it because we told the governor and he said yes. And so we put it at Explore Minnesota so that I didn't drive my own staff nuts because they were like, you can't just do a podcast. You have to be strict, you know. And so I hope the professional doesn't screw it up because it is very organic and very like real, very no budget, you know, but it's a ton of fun. So yeah,
Awesome.
yeah.
You just got like, you know,
I know,
1,000 more
more listeners. Yeah. Yeah. So, and there's like new episodes released periodically.
Pretty soon you're gonna have sponsors.
Right? Yeah.
Budget problem solved.
Well, we laughed, you know, when the new outdoor recreation industry numbers came out, so Minnesota jumped from 11 billion to 13.5 billion, and Lauren was like, I think it's because of our podcast. I was like, I am confident it's not because of our podcast, but it's good news nevertheless, right? So, right.
Other questions from online? Okay,
so I know that you can't really address this because you're a state agency, but legacy expires in 9 years.
Yeah.
I know the Parks and Trails Legacy Advisory Committee has been talking around about this for the last 5 years, but now it's actually some of the lives and thinking about the authorization of that. You know, I think with Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund getting reauthorized with very little fanfare until the last few months.
Right.
Bodes well for us, except for lots of other organizations seeing that huge pot of money. I mean, I don't see us scrapping over 40 for 20, but I see everybody else scrapping to get into what's a wonderful dedicated source of funding. You know, just out of curiosity, if there's been conversations and when is our strategic time to jump into that? Because I feel like it's going to be more of a defensive move for all of us than an offensive pressure on those dollars.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you've had conversations. The conversations I'm aware of, what I will say is the kind of NGO coalition that pushed on the first legacy amendment. They were obviously the same folks focused on the Environment and Natural Resource Trust Fund renewal. They've pivoted. I mean, they're looking at that, and I think they are already planning like what is the strategic timing to get that renewed. I tend to stay out of those campaign conversations. I could get myself in trouble really quickly. But like just enough of an ear to the ground to know are conversations going on, what are they thinking of in timing? Because I think one thing that we can do collectively is really do more about telling the story of the benefits to Minnesotans and Minnesota from these dollars. So I think like it's never too early or too late to be doing that. And the other thing I'll just say is I think actually, you know, there were some of us, and I will say I had my moments where, because it was such like a stealth campaign on the Environment Natural Resources Trust Fund, you're like, is anything going on this? Is it going to pass? And it passed overwhelmingly, right? Like 77% statewide, more than 50% in every single county in Minnesota. I mean, there's just no question. When you look at the last election, and there is no agreement on any issue or any candidate except for this one. So I think there are some key lessons learned from that, both in terms of like for the folks who are running the campaign, which is not us, but also in all of us recognizing that Minnesotans are pretty united on their willingness to pay for this because they value the outdoors and the environment. And this is not a partisan issue. And I think that's the other, I forgot to mention, like the real opportunity for us this legislative session. There is not anything coming out of the legislature that does not have bipartisan support because of the margins. And so we are squarely, the good news is we are squarely in that space where a lot of those other folks who are going to be you know, wanting to get in on sales tax kinds of things, they're not squarely in that space. And so, yeah, you know, conversations that need to be had and vigilance, but I think there's also like a lot of good news in that.
And I just want to add on to that just because I am keeping my eye on the ball on that. And so one of the primary drivers, you know, that I work with a lot is Conservation Minnesota, and they were, you know, kind of the sort of behind the scenes leads, as you said, on the very stealth DNRTF renewal. You know, we participated in that. We were, you know, signed on, participated in that, and I have been having conversations with them frequently about that because I work with them on a lot of water and wastewater issues as well. And so we are keeping our eye on the ball, but it is sometimes there are things we don't spend a lot of time going wild public. So I don't want you guys to think we're not paying attention. So
And it is nice.
yeah. So, but no, it is, we've actually been I have conversations with that pretty frequently when I see my buddies over there. So
But Elizabeth, would you agree that as agencies and implementers telling the story of how we're spending those dollars and how they're benefiting helps those of you who are keeping your eye on the campaign?
absolutely. And that's why, again, when I said earlier, I think at the beginning, it's a great sort of tie back to what I said earlier. It's really important that your legislators know what you're doing and the good work, you know, and that they're seeing all of the projects that are in here, not just the projects you're funding with this, but we were talking, you know, Jeff brought up the outdoor recreations before. When I mention, when I say the DNR local Parks and Trails grants program, outdoor recreation is part of that. That is actually very much part of it. But it is very important that they understand the good work that you're doing with Legacy and the good work you're doing with the other DNR program grants, because that is extremely important, because it may not be something you're voting on today, but then when we have that emergency and things are threatened, you can be like, hey, do you remember that awesome fishing pier we put in, or that awesome connector, or this or that? If you've talked to them about that already, it's a lot easier than running in an emergency. So yes, always be talking to them about the great work you're doing. Legislation it's a relationship game, and that the time we were talking about the trees earlier, time to build that relationship probably was, you know, could be 5 years ago, but no reason not to start it today. So
We do have one more question online. Sarah Thompson.
Hi, thank you, Commissioner and Assistant Commissioner, for being here today. I really appreciate your time. So because the conversation was brought up about federal funding, and I understand that that's kind of something out of our control at this point, but when it comes to, and currently, you know, our county, I'm from Itasca County, and we're applying for a federal recreational trails program grant. And right now, that's currently the only program out there for equipment. And so when it comes time for clubs or entities to apply for federal funding for equipment, is there any outlook on the state side of things to for other assistance with that, with if this were to, you know, if federal funding, you know, in the near future comes to a halt for these clubs and or our agencies, has there been any discussion on that or consideration of other grant opportunities for equipment for these to maintain these parks and trails?
Sarah, thanks for the question. And so there hasn't been any like discussions specific because we are still so much in the trying to get a you know a beat on sort of what's going on. But
Yeah.
you know, I think the commissioner mentioned that if that funding were to go away, you know, we would be looking at, okay, what might need to change with the state funding, and certainly we'd be working with legislative partners, right, to think about, okay, you know, we can't and shouldn't operate sort of business as usual with the state funding if that federal partnership funding isn't available. So I would see the opportunity, and I think at the DNR, we'd certainly welcome the opportunity to have those conversations, recognizing that, you know, there are those specific grants that are only available for certain things. If that federal piece goes away, those things don't go away. So we may need to kind of rethink how the state dollars are available in order to not leave, you know, any particular need completely in the cold.
Right.
Yeah.
And the only thing I'll add to that, because I think that's spot on, is just, and I had to share this with our own staff earlier, just the context of some people are saying, well, is the state going to replace federal funds? And, you know, the reality is, the federal footprint that funds state government is enormous. No state funds itself, right, without the federal government. And you think actually of the space we work in, we're not in a bad spot relative to folks who work in education or human services or health, which are, you know, 50% plus funded by federal funding. And so I just, you know, eyes wide open. I think there's going to be limited ability for the state to jump in and replace, depending on what ends up being lost from the federal system. But can we stop doing business as usual? Can we look at flexibility? Can we look at those kinds of things? Absolutely. You know, that's all on the table. I'm cautioning people that, you know, it's not like the state of Minnesota is going to make up the share that the federal government plays. That's not a reality. A good budget year, and this one even less.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Well, thank you so much. And you're welcome to stay for lunch. Yeah.
Unfortunately, I think we both have to head back, but again, thank you so much.
We really appreciate it.
The invitation and the opportunity for conversation. All right, and good luck for the next day.
Okay, so we'll take a lunch break and go ahead and come to the facilities, walk around a little bit and grab some food. And be thinking about so I really like to be inspired. And I want you to be thinking about what is something that inspired you to choose the career that got you to where you are today. And you might have chosen a career that has nothing to do with parks and trails, but that doesn't matter. Think about your original inspiration that started your journey, and we'll share like during lunch.
Okay. I just want to, just two more announcements. One is that I want to thank Gina and to thank Alex, who makes all of this happen behind the scenes. So big thank you to Alex. And the newsletter. And then, yeah, she does a lot. And then I also want to actually introduce somebody over here. This is our Capital Pathways intern, who also is a junior at one of the best colleges in Minnesota, McAllister, which is my alma mater. So I'm proud. But this is Sheila. So over lunch, I would encourage you to introduce yourself. And Gina's question is actually a good one to think about. But you know, introduce yourself to Sheila, and she, you know, helps us out around here. She's actually been covering hearings for me when I'm busy and has come to some of our meetings. So she's kind of dove right in. So please introduce yourself to Sheila as well. But we've got the food over here. There's water and stuff over there. They said this is, we ordered the 20 people package and it looks like it. So, but lots more tips too. So,
And to everyone online also.
oh, sorry. Sorry, we don't have food for you guys.
Oh, that's okay.
Thanks for coming. We're gonna end the meeting now, but the recording will be available online.
Okay. Thanks, Sarah and Sarah.
Yeah, sorry I couldn't be there today.
Thanks for joining online. Have a great day.
Yes, you too. Thanks.